Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and completely demystify the somewhat intimidating world of psychotherapy. Look, if you've ever scrolled through a therapist directory, seen terms like psychodynamic or cognitive behavioral, and just felt completely overwhelmed by all the jargon, you are absolutely not alone. Finding help can honestly feel like trying to learn a totally new language. But today, we're going to make sense of the whole shebang by exploring the three major historical forces that fundamentally shape how therapists approach human distress. By the end of this, you'll have a crystal clear framework for classifying and understanding exactly how different therapies work, and more importantly, why they work.
We can clearly trace the evolution of therapy across three distinct eras. It all starts with the earliest approach, the psychodynamic therapies, pioneered by early psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud. This was literally the original talk therapy. From there, the field reacted and evolved, moving to the behavior therapies, which emerged second. Think of this as a major shift from studying hidden internal thoughts to studying visible outward actions. And finally, we arrive at the existential and humanistic approaches, famously known in psychology as the third force. What's really fascinating here is that the existential approach actually emerged as a direct rebellion against the rigid, clinical nature of those first two. So keeping this chronological order in mind is absolutely crucial, because each movement was an active response to the ones that came before it.
To truly understand how these three core philosophies differ, we're going to put them to the test using a brilliant classification matrix based on 6 key parameters: the 3 therapeutic forces themselves, finding the root cause, core methods of treatment, the client-therapist relationship, the ultimate benefit, and duration of treatment. First up, parameter 1, the 3 therapeutic forces. We need to establish what these approaches fundamentally believe is the actual cause of our psychological problems.
The stark contrast between the first 2 major approaches is just fascinating. Psychodynamic therapy looks inward, deep inward. It argues that the source of your distress is an intrapsychic conflict. To put that simply, imagine a giant invisible tug-of-war happening inside your own mind between your hidden primitive desires and your strict moral compass. The distress you're feeling? It's just the tension of that rope. On the flip side, behavior therapy points the finger completely away from the deep unconscious. Instead, it looks at our environment and how we react to it. It proposes that psychological problems pop up simply because of faulty learning of behaviors and cognitions. You aren't fundamentally broken, you just learned a bad habit. It's kind of like accidentally touching a hot stove as a kid and learning to fear the entire kitchen. That learned response is what's actually causing the pain.
Meanwhile, the existential approach pivots entirely. It doesn't look at a mechanical breakdown of the psyche, and it definitely doesn't view us just as products of faulty conditioning. Instead, it tackles the profound questions about the meaning, and sometimes the futility of our very existence. It suggests that psychological problems happen when we lie awake at 3 a.m. struggling with massive, heavy questions like, who am I really? And what is the point of all this? The root cause, according to this third force, is essentially the human condition itself. So, now that we know what each force thinks the problem is, parameter 2 asks, finding the root cause. Basically, where did this whole thing actually start? Well, the timelines of distress for these therapies are totally distinct. Psychodynamic therapy digs heavily into the past, specifically pointing to unfulfilled childhood desires and unresolved fears as the origin point of those inner conflicts. It suggests that a fear you experienced at age 5 is still secretly running the show in the background of your mind today. Behavior therapy, though? Much less concerned with distant childhood memories. It focuses instead on faulty conditioning patterns and distorted beliefs that you've picked up along the way, often way more recently. But the existential approach is hyper-focused on right now. It suggests the current feelings of loneliness and alienation in the present moment are the true origin of your distress. It's not about what your parents did decades ago. It's about how isolated you feel today.
Moving right along to parameter 3, core methods of treatment. What does the actual work in the room look like?
As you might guess, the methods are radically different. If you see a psychodynamic therapist, you might literally lie on a couch and say whatever pops into your head, a process called free association, while also talking about your dreams. The therapist acts almost like a detective, interpreting all these clues to help you confront hidden conflicts. A behavior therapist acts much more like a personal trainer for your mind. They're going to identify those faulty conditioning patterns and set up alternative behavioral contingencies. Basically, they restructure your habits and challenge faulty thinking with active homework and practice. But for an existential therapist, the method is almost radical in its simplicity. They primarily provide a highly positive, accepting, and non-judgmental environment for you to talk. They act purely as a sounding board and a facilitator for your own personal growth.
Now, this stark difference in methods
brings up a fascinating climax in our whole framework. Who actually holds the answers to your problems? Is it the highly trained therapist sitting across from you, or is it you? Let's dive into parameter 4, the client-therapist relationship, to see how the power dynamics shift between these forces.
The crucial point here is how power and expertise are distributed in the room. Both psychodynamic and behavior therapies operate on the core assumption that the therapist is the expert. The therapist understands your intrapsychic conflicts or your faulty learning better than you do, right? And therefore they are uniquely capable of finding the correct solutions for you. Existential therapies completely flip this script. They totally reject the idea of the therapist as an all-knowing problem solver. Instead, they view themselves as a fellow traveler on your journey. The therapist is merely a facilitator, holding up a mirror in a warm, secure, empathetic environment so that you feel safe enough to explore your own mind and arrive at your own solutions.
We're now at parameter 5, arguably the most important one for anyone actually seeking help, the ultimate benefit. What's the major takeaway here?
For psychodynamic therapy, the holy grail is something called emotional insight. But listen, emotional insight isn't just knowing you have a fear of abandonment, for example. True emotional insight happens when you understand your hidden conflicts intellectually, then you accept them emotionally, and finally, you actually change your emotions towards those conflicts in a profound way. It's truly feeling and grieving that fear in the room, creating a real emotional shift that ultimately reduces your symptoms. Contrast this with the existential benefit, which centers entirely on personal growth. Here, getting rid of a specific symptom isn't necessarily the main goal. The chief benefit is gaining an ever-increasing understanding of yourself, your true aspirations, your emotions, and your genuine motives in life. It's not about fixing a broken machine, it's more like helping a plant grow toward the sun. The healing happens as a natural byproduct of this profound self-actualization.
When we map all these out side by side, the contrast is super clear. While psychodynamic therapy looks for deep emotional insight and existential therapy looks for overarching personal growth, behavior therapy is laser-focused on practical, tangible action. It aims specifically at establishing adaptive behaviors and thoughts. By directly changing your faulty actions to healthy ones, the distress is naturally removed. It's highly, highly pragmatic.
Now, for anyone committing to therapy, all of this theory eventually boils down to one very practical, real-world question.
Let's look at parameter 6, duration of treatment. Basically, how long are you going to be in the therapist's chair?
The variations here are vast. Classical psychoanalysis, the oldest form of the psychodynamic approach, is a massive commitment. In its original form, this could sometimes mean visiting the therapist 4 to 5 times a week for several years. Now, while modern versions are much more streamlined, it definitely remains a longer-term endeavor. By contrast, behavior therapies, cognitive therapies, and existential therapies are generally much shorter. They are highly targeted. A modern cognitive or behavior protocol, for instance, might cure a specific phobia in as little as 10 to 15 sessions over just a few months.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. We've seen how these three forces, psychodynamic, behavior, and existential, differ completely in their classification of human suffering, the role of the therapist, and the ultimate goals of healing. So, based on everything we've explored today, which of these three forces resonates most with how you view the human mind? Do you believe we're primarily driven by hidden conflicts, shaped by our learned habits, or defined by our search for meaning? Think about it. Understanding these distinct frameworks is absolutely the first powerful step in understanding yourself.